hey, ya, hey, ya, yo,
You
hey, hey, yo, hey, hey, ya,
hey ya,
hey,
hey
hey, ya,
ya,
hey.
hey.
Jerry Lowman, born at Tallahassee Indian Hospital.
Shirley Lowman, and I was born at Ludlow Community in Ludlow, Oklahoma. I was born at home.
I grew up at Smith, Watson, Buffalo area till I was about 9. I moved to Western Oklahoma, stayed there about 15, till about 18 years old, and I came back when my grandma died. And from there, I just been here all my life. But when I went to school back then, I didn't know one bit of English. Everything was Choctaw back then. But when I went to Western Oklahoma, it was pretty hard because it was all white school. But I finally got to where I can communicate with them, talking. So it was pretty rough at first, but now it's getting easier. I mean, I can understand now. It took a long time for me to learn English, but I can talk Choctaw and English real good now.
Okay, I went to school at Burkhardt School. It was a rock building, and I was like Jerry too. I couldn't understand or speak English when I went to school, but I never failed a grade. And I guess probably around third or fourth grade is when I started learning how to talk, maybe. But we didn't go anywhere. We just stayed where we lived, never had transportation. There was 11 of us, so therefore we were never owned a vehicle or anything, no electricity. We didn't have electricity. Uh, when I left home, I was 18 years old, and I still didn't have electricity at the time. Yeah, so it seems like it was a year or two later that Mom and Dad finally got electricity to their house. Family, we live out in a rural area, so you couldn't go nowhere. You just stayed there and went to school and never, it was almost like a rut. You were there, never associated with nobody. Once in a while, we'd see our grandparents who lived in Bethel by wagon. They'd come visit us. But as for us, we didn't have no vehicle. As later on in life, maybe when I was 9 or 10, Daddy had a wagon and horses. That's how they traveled uh, to go to grocery store, which was about 4 or 5 miles from our house. Used to be.
Yeah.
Mom and I rode horses to go get things that we needed from the store, the necessities like salt, flour, sugar, grease, lard. But that's how we lived. Mama did her own gardening, and being poor, we grew up in hand-me-downs. You know, we never had new clothes, we never had new shoes. Everything was hand-me-downs. So when Mama got clothes that had years ago, well, it's now coming back. They used to put beads on clothing, and Mama would tear that apart and do her beadwork. And I guess that's where I learned how to beadwork from Mom. She'd use those beads to make herself earrings or necklace. So I guess my interest came from Mom, but even though she didn't never owned any beads, but she got it from the clothing that we got
But
at church.
I look back and I look at my grandpa, how he was, and look back at my grandma, and she used to wear, and her, I don't know, she used to wear apron all the time, look like her, and she'd go barefooted. She never wore shoes till she might she go to church, she wore shoes, but as she go to town, she went barefooted, and that's how. And I learned a lot from my grandpa and my parents too. My mama's Creek, she's from Eufaula area, and she came down here and met my dad, and that's they've been together. And Dad was good, but he worked hard too all his life, and I guess it just barely making ends meet too, because we would back then wages was nothing, maybe 50 cents an hour. That's how he was working. And I remember when I was working my first job in 1955, working in cotton field, I was working 50 cents an hour, 10 hours a day, $5 a day. That's how I worked. I grew up, and it was rough, but when you look back, it was easy. The money back then was just good compared to what we're making now. It is. Everything was cheap back then, and I remember all of them good days we had back then. You could take a quarter and go to the movie back home back then, and you could stay there all day and get what you want. And that's how I grew up.
Well, like you said, he worked out in Cottonfield, which I did too. Every summer when school was out, Daddy would load us up. Mom stayed home with the smaller kids. There's 11 of us kids. But we'd go to Texas to hoe cotton, and like you said, the price was then very, the wages were not good, but we'd go to Texas, pull cottons. And then when that sometimes didn't pan out, we'd go peeling poles. So I've worked since I was about 10 years old. And when I came and applied Johnson O'Malley, that's when they started tutoring. Teacher's aide is what we were called. So I retired 6 years ago for 35 years of public school here. And I drove bus 16 or 17 years. And I was a teacher's assistant in those years. That's been my life.
It started about 72. We went to Mississippi with a group of Gene Wilson, and he took a group of people down there, maybe 30 or 40 people down there. We go down to Mississippi, and when we get down there, what are we going to get out of this? And some of us going to make dresses, or some of us going to start chanting. And my goal was to chant, to learn. And we can go down there, we'd visit the old people that can talk Choctaw, and that's where we kind of probably took about a couple of trips down there before I really got into meeting the old people. And I had to go around. When I went down there, I had to go around asking people who the old people, but when they do the fair time, they wouldn't be out there, and I would talk to the old people, and that's where I met Prentice and Amy.
And this was a Christian education in our Choctaw Parish. I mean, then it was Choctaw Parish, but it's changed to another name. We have another name. But anyway, we had a minister, two ministers, Reverend John Bohannon and Gene Wilson. And Gene was in charge of the Christian education. He wanted to do cultural thing for the Choctaws here, and received a grant, wrote a proposal and received a grant. And I think that's how we started. And we would get bus, borrow a bus, rent a bus, and some of us would drive. And we had his grandpa going one year. He was in his 80s. He wanted to go and we went every fair. We just didn't take off any other time. The only time we went was during the fair time, then where the people were all together there, so the young people could enjoy, the fair. So for me, culture was like something I never thought about, who we were, where we came from. So at first, I guess you're just thinking, gosh, because we all went in a cave. I didn't bring the pictures, but we have cave where our minister, our leader led us into the cave in water, and I would never do that again. But we did things like that, going into cave sides, going way out in the woods where the Naniweya was at first time, and it was moved to another place. But we wanted to go see the first cave where the Choctaws was supposed to have come out of. So, like I say, at that time, I guess you really just don't know what culture was, who I was, where I came from. But then it was after that when I guess we started learning and appreciate our culture.
Them people that took us to the cave, as we went in the cave, but they didn't want us to go in there. They said something's going to grab you. As we went down there, and they were afraid for us. They thought something's going to happen to us as we were in that cave.
Because people didn't go in there.
They didn't go in there because it was full of water. But it was in there. We went. So I don't know how far we went in there, but
it was cold. The water was cold.
Then and that main Naniweya is about a mile away from there. and we walked through it. Some of us got in the car and went way around, but I walked through the swamps to get there, and I was kind of afraid, but I kind of followed the trail, and I made it though.
Yeah, when we formed a group and we learned how to dance and chant, we went to McAllister School, Hugo. We performed, did a lot of cultural show. We were part of floats that was held in Wright City and Tallahena. As a group, we did a lot of things trying to promote our culture. Ministers are allowed at churches, so therefore, if they didn't care, if they didn't like it, somehow we would hear about it, so therefore, you don't go back there. But, and the one that were supporting were members of the church, elders of the church, not elderly people. It was mostly the elderly people. Elder is somebody next to a minister or pastor or reverend, whatever, however you want to say it, but we call them elders as a leader of a church. But elderly people are the ones that was not for. Some, but we had a whole bunch that were for and some that weren't. The elderly, older people, in other words. And they were, maybe I was like them. I didn't know my culture, and they never knew their culture. They never knew where they come from. Because Mississippi to here, you can put it together, but they couldn't. I was born here, so I've always been here. Maybe that's the attitude that I had till Jean, because there was a whole bunch of young adults then. We were mostly young adults and young people and little ones all combined, I guess. And we did have some people older than us dancing, like John McKinney. And yeah, we did. Even Jean danced. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was talking to my grandpa. We was going to Mississippi, and we was trying to get a group of people to go. Why don't you ask so and so? And they asked, why don't you ask your grandpa if he wants to go? So I went to his house. And next week we're going to Mississippi. I was talking to him Choctaw then, because when I was just telling him. And I went to ask him, if you want to go? Well, he was ready to go. I said, I'm ready. Well, he was packed next few days, and when there's time to go, he's ready to go. When he attended the fair, he's the only one that, when he
Sit in the hot sun.
don't care how hot it was, he was out there watching stickball games. Like us, younger generation, we were sitting in air conditioning, but he was sitting there hot. I don't care how hot it was, and he enjoyed every minute of it.
He even come home and worked on stickball sticks.
Yeah, he made me some stickball sticks. I still got it too.
He did. He was in his 80s. Not only him, but we had Isian.
Yeah, several old people went
Oh,
visiting.
elderly. Oh, in the 80s. At least those two I remember mostly.
Yeah. I think he just wanted to see the Mississippi River when we went down there. How big it was big to him. He enjoyed the trip, and I'm glad I took him.
Hey-ya, 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 you-way, hey-ya,